So we have 5 minutes. So we have 5 minutes. We can have a 0 hour. So what's new, madam? What is happening in your area?
Yeah. Hyderabad is peaking.
Yes. Why Hyderabad is now picking up? Hyderabad, then Bangalore, Pune. These are the new hotspots.
Yeah. I think till everybody gets infected slowly, one by one city. Now districts are more getting infected than Hyderabad.
So do you think that, because what we are observing is that in the first peak, joint families and congested areas are getting infected.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, in Delhi, we had all joint families have been infected now. Now there is a reduction by 50% in the new cases, because now joint families, all of them have got infected.
Okay.
Because now if you have 2 people and 2 rooms to stay, then your social distancing is higher. Then your chances
is already there.
Low.
Yeah, our 80% of the cases are in the old cities.
Old cities, again congested.
Which are densely populated.
Densely populated. And do you feel that that really it's such a serious disease? Because I'm finding it's not.
My voice is okay, sir?
Yes, absolutely. So we have 3 more minutes. So
I'll just check my slides once whether I can share it. Yeah, it's ready. The slides are seen, then I'll stop sharing.
Yes, no, keep it there.
Okay, sir.
Let it be there, because that gives you your introduction to people. So, so we will have a lecture followed by an interactive session, and we expect all neurologists in the country, a large number of them being present and discussing this subject. And it's a good relief to people when we talk about something non-COVID.
Yes. COVID era. Yeah, every day it's COVID around.
Because people are now forgetting non-COVID manifestations. Everywhere they are talking COVID, COVID.
We are having admissions of neurology and COVID. This 2 weeks we had around 10 admissions. We started collecting the data. GB syndrome, I recently had a status epilepticus in a COVID patient.
Okay, what was the precipitating factor?
It's like encephalitic-like illness. Confusional state, child around 12 years.
So 12 years child, you have encephalitis.
Yeah, she came with initial behavioral issues. After that, confusional state, seizures within a week. Then we just wanted an MRI. Before MRI, we screened the chest. So we found that it was showing COVID pneumonia. Immediately, we did a PCR, which became positive. So she was ventilated, treated, now recovering.
So this is unusual for a 12-year-old child to get encephalitis.
Yeah, but we don't know. She was transported from Bhopal for management.
So any other child you have seen with neurological manifestations?
No. Usually we see adults, but this because of status, she was referred to us because we manage.
How common is Guillain-Barré?
We don't know. Guillain-Barré can be para-infectious or post-infectious. So whether it is an association or immune-mediated.
So was it?
We are having a lot of strokes, sir. Strokes. Large infarcts.
Strokes are coming because these are thrombotic strokes.
Yeah.
And you may find
like MI.
Like MI. And most of them will require a TPA and they may recover. They may totally recover.
We thrombolized also one case. Yeah. But few cases are really large strokes.
So what we are seeing is that they often miss their diagnosis on day 1, day 2, day 3. Most of them are coming with stroke on day 4 or day 5. Can we start? Yes. So we are now live. We will start our session. So good evening, all our viewers, my colleagues from all across the country. And this is a specialized session in a COVID era. And greetings from HeartCare Foundation of India, IGCP MedTalks. I have with me Dr. S. Sita Jayalakshmi, and she is a consultant neurologist at Krishna Institute of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad. What a good relief that in the COVID era, we are concentrating on something which is rare in COVID era. Status epilepticus, you will have encounter only 1 or 2 cases of status epilepticus. But now we are talking about management of refractory status epilepticus, controversies and guidelines. So this will, after the lecture, we open up for the questions. You can send your questions and I will be moderating that session with question answers with Madam Sita Jayalakshmi. So I present to you, Madam Jayalakshmi.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I thank IJCP and the IAN for giving me this opportunity. So I will start with a case. This is a 7-year-old child who is doing 3rd standard, absolutely normal with full-term normal delivery. He came to us. He never had epilepsy in the past or febrile convulsions, came with history of fever of 1 week, followed by 2 GTCS on the day 4 of fever, followed by drowsiness. There is no family history or past history of epilepsy or febrile convulsions. And when he came to us, he had only just 2 seizures. So we kept him in the ward. But within next 24 hours, he developed recurrent seizures and it evolved into status epilepticus. So the child was shifted to the ICU. Then initially received the first followed by the second line AEDs as per protocols. Still the seizures continued. He evolved into refractory status epilepticus, followed by super refractory status epilepticus, where he failed multiple in parenteral anti-epileptic drugs as well as intravenous anesthetic drugs. And he received even thiopental, with which he developed significant hypotension and arrhythmias. Then on the day 5, initially when they don't respond to midazolam, we add ketamine as per protocol. So he was given ketamine. Also there was no response. He received immunomodulation with methylprednisolone followed by immunoglobulins. And this is the EEG during the first initial days. If the red is on the right side, we can see that there is continuous EEG activity suggestive of seizures in the right hemispherical leads, which evolves over a period of 30 seconds. This is the next slide. And after that, the seizure stops. Then if you see again, there is some burst suppression with a flattening in between the background EEG because the patient is on IV anesthetic drugs. Again, some slowing. And if you see here, now the seizures are starting on the opposite side. That is on the left side of the hemisphere. That is blue is left side. Again, the seizure evolves over the next 20 to 30 seconds. And again, if you see the seizure comes to the right side. So again, the right hemispherical epileptiform activity suggestive of right hemispherical spread. Then the child continues to be drowsy. But if you look at, he is having continuous jerking of his tongue, which is suggestive of subclinical seizures or the so-called non-convulsive status. Again, this is another part. If you can see, again, along with the jerking of the lower lip, the child is having jerking of the tongue, continues to be unconscious. So this is suggestive of subclinical seizures and continuous non-convulsive status epilepticus. And his MRI of brain was absolutely normal. And this is the clean MRI of the brain, which didn't show any etiology to explain the status epilepticus. And he underwent 2-3 serial MRIs over a period of 3 weeks, and all MRIs were normal. So during the course, on day 7, we increased the midazolam dose to the maximum dose of 25 milligrams per hour along with ketamine. And this is the EEG, which shows some improvement in the epileptiform activity, except from some spikes occurring posteriorly. So we were happy. But again, the seizures, the moment we started reducing the dose of midazolam to wean him out of the IV anesthetic drugs, again, the epileptiform activity started. The child continues to have seizures. Like that, we reach day 17. Again, the EEG shows spikes on both the sides. And on day 21, he was given maximum dose of midazolam and ketamine was continued. Normally, we don't give ketamine for more than 2 weeks because long-term use can cause cognitive issues. Hence, then after both, gradually over a period on day 28, we achieved, the child responded to medication and we could get him out of the ventilator and get him out of the IV anesthetic medication. But this continued for almost so many days. And on day 58, the child developed purpura fulminalis. And if you see, there is and because of this, he developed ischemia of the limb. And though the feet recovered over the time, he needed a left below elbow amputation, and he had even significant cardiac arrhythmias during the course, either because of the anesthetic drugs or others. And if you see, he was in the hospital for almost 62 days, continuing on the ventilator. And on 62 days, we could finally get him the refractory status epilepticus has resolved. So if you look at the follow-up, he was discharged at 2 months, 16 days of the hospitalization, including the ICU and the room. And at 12 months, he was still on 6 anti-epileptic drugs, getting on and off seizures. Then it took almost 1 year for him to get his milestones back, started recognizing the parents. Now today, it is more than 9 years of his status epilepticus. But the child has significant memory disturbances. Though he is communicating well, independent in activities of daily living, he could not go to school, and he has significant behavioral problems on 4 anti-epileptic drugs. So if you look at this, it's at the beginning, we do not know how the patient will fare, whether he will survive or not. If he survives, what are the long-term consequences of status epilepticus, and how to counsel the family, because few patients recover in a week, some recover in weeks, some take even months. So for this, it's important for us to understand what are the stages of status epilepticus. When the patient comes in one stage, we do not know to which stage he will progress and how he is going to recover. So the stage 1 is usually occurs at home, which is the premonitory stage, which lasts for 5 to 10 minutes. No one comes to us in stage 1. And most of the patients come to tertiary care units in stage 2, where it is an established status epilepticus, where the seizures are continuing, which occurs within 10 to 30 minutes. The stage 3 is the one where you have given the intravenous midazolam or lorazepam, followed by 1 anti-epileptic drug. Still the patient is having seizures, continues to seize. This is usually occurs in 30 to 60 minutes. That is stage 3. This is refractory status. And in spite of these medications, if there is no response, even after 24 hours of giving the IV anesthetic drugs like midazolam, if the patient continues to have seizures, it is called super refractory status, which usually occurs after 24 hours. All this is if you are aggressively treating the patient. So why it is important to know the stages of status epilepticus? Because each stage is associated with a different mortality. If somebody can treat within few minutes, the mortality can be reduced markedly. That's why it's important to educate everybody, especially those who have past step epilepsy, to use intranasal midazolam at home to prevent the progression of a seizure into status epilepticus. And if you look at, if the seizures last for more than 30 minutes, means continuously, if the child or adult is seizing, the mortality is 10 to 20%. And if you look at, if somebody is seizing continuously for more than 2 hours, where it becomes a refractory status epilepticus, the mortality is 40%. Whereas if it is a super refractory status epilepticus, where the patient is on IV anesthetic drugs and continues to seize, in spite of the IV anesthetic drugs, the mortality is 60%, suggesting that an aggressive early therapy is the key in the management of status epilepticus. With this introduction, we'll come to what are the controversies and guidelines in the management of status epilepticus, especially the refractory status epilepticus. So we should be well versed. Definitions itself, there is a controversy. Then what determines the outcome? Is it the etiology? Is it the duration of status epilepticus, or is it the treatment? And next question is whether the patients with status epilepticus who failed 1 or 2 drugs should be treated with another AED, or directly we go for IV anesthetic drugs like midazolam or thiopental. And which IV anesthetic drug should be better? Is it midazolam, propofol, or thiopental? And do we really need to do a continuous EEG bedside because it's expensive, adds to the costs already in the ICU? What EEG patterns should be the target? And how many times the coma should be induced? Means we are giving midazolam and later we are reducing the midazolam. After reducing the midazolam, the child starts getting seizures again. Again, you are uptitrating midazolam. Like this, how many times should we go on doing it? And how long treatment effort should be continued before giving up? Because of the cost, sometimes most of the patients leave the hospital as lamas. And finally, when we did the follow-up, most of them succumbed to their epilepsy and died. So it's important to educate and strike a balance between the efficacy, hospital costs, emotional stress of the family. All this should be kept in mind, and it should be done on a day-to-day discussion with the family members, managing all the aspects. Next, we have guidelines about definition, etiology and pathogenesis, how many drugs to use, which IV AEDs is better, and the role of continuous EEG monitoring. So we'll start with the definition. Initially, status epilepticus was defined as seizures lasting for more than 10 minutes and initially 30 minutes. But now it is reduced to 5 minutes. It is called by the International League Against Epilepsy as T1, that is beyond which the seizures are unlikely to stop on their own. So if a person is continuously seizing for 5 minutes, or if he gets at least 2 or more seizures within 5 minutes without regaining consciousness in between the 2 seizures, one should call it as status epilepticus. This is important because we need to treat them aggressively. This message has go to the physicians because most of the patients first go to the nearest primary physicians. So the IV loading dose has to be given there before the patient is transported to the secondary or tertiary care centers. The second one is, second is called T2, means beyond which there is a neuronal death, neuronal injury, and alteration of the neuronal networks. So this point is 30 minutes. Again, this is another indication that if a seizures or continuous seizures last more than 30 minutes, unlikely they will be controlled with medication and will evolve into refractory and super refractory status epilepticus. So with this, the definition is status epilepticus is defined as seizures lasting for more than 5 minutes or recurrent epileptic activity over a period of more than 5 minutes without regaining the pre-existing level of consciousness. Whereas refractory status epilepticus is status epilepticus lasting longer than 120 minutes and not responding to your first and second line anti-epileptic drugs. Means we have given intravenous lorazepam followed by intravenous loading dose of either phenytoin or fosphenytoin or even levetiracetam. So after this also if the patient seizes, it's refractory status. The third one is super refractory status epilepticus. It is nothing but it is a refractory status epilepticus which recurs 24 hours or more after the initiation of treatment with IV anesthetic drugs. Means we have started IV midazolam for 24 hours while giving midazolam. After 24 hours while reducing midazolam also, if somebody gets seizures, it's called super refractory status epilepticus. And then the definitive control of status epilepticus should be established within 60 minutes of onset with the termination of both clinical and electrographic. Means patient is not seizing outside, EEG is showing continuous epileptiform activity, and one has to really terminate even the electrical activity to have the best outcomes. Then how do we classify the status epilepticus? The status epilepticus is classified as those with prominent motor symptoms, that is, and those without motor symptoms. Those with motor symptoms can be tonic-clonic or even myoclonic, focal motor or hyperkinetic or tonic. Whereas without motor symptoms is non-convulsive without coma. All of us know about convulsive status where the patient will be seizing. I will just show an example of non-convulsive status. This is a young girl who just was shifted from the ER, and you can see this patient is continuously confused, looking around and not responding. She was asked to lift her right hand followed by left hand. And if you see, there is a jerking of the head and also the eye. This goes on for hours. So this is an example of complex partial status. The next one is non-convulsive status. If you see this elderly lady who is in the ICU in a comatose state with severe hyponatremia. If you see, this is epileptic nystagmus, where she is getting continuous jerking of the eyelids as well as the eyes with vertical movements. And when we did her EEG, it was continuously showing epileptiform activity. In comparison, focal motor status is a condition where there will be jerking of one-sided limbs, but the patient will be totally conscious during the event. If you see, this child is conscious, but continuously having jerking of the right hand. So this is also classified under focal motor status epilepticus. Here, this is a Rasmussen's syndrome causing left side Rasmussen's causing continuous EPC, epilepsia partialis continua, involving the right hand, and this just goes on continuously without stopping. So if you look at this incidence of status epilepticus, it recently the incidence has increased. Initially it was 3.5, now it is 12.5 per 100,000. And it accounts for almost 20% of the neuro-intensive care admissions. And of those cases with status epilepticus, almost 1/3 or more than that progress to refractory status, and 15% progress to super refractory status epilepticus. The next one is, what is the etiology of refractory and super refractory status epilepticus? As I marked in this red color, in developing countries, the most important is CNS infection, that is encephalitis. Most common is either viral encephalitis or autoimmune encephalitis, and sometimes even meningitis can cause it. This is one of our publications where we have looked at status epilepticus in almost more than 200 patients, where we found that acute symptomatic etiology, that is encephalitis, is the most common cause of status in adults. Whereas in case of elderly, vascular etiology is the leading cause of epilepsy, but these patients do not progress into refractory because they respond very well to medication. Comparatively, acute symptomatic etiology like hyponatremia is associated with high mortality. Whereas in children, in the West, it is remote symptomatic etiology. That means they had a childhood stroke. Now there is a gliosis in the brain causing the seizures. Whereas still in our country, infections, encephalitis, other CNS infections are responsible for acute symptomatic etiology. Does the etiology of status epilepticus determine the outcome? If you look at it, whenever a patient's non-epileptic stops medication, suddenly develops status, they respond very well to medication and they do not progress into refractory. Whereas if status is due to metabolic cause, they progress into refractory status. Whereas status secondary to vascular events like stroke do not progress into refractory status. But the most important ones, two important causes. The hypoxic insult, usually we see in the cardiac ICUs, where after a sudden cardiac arrest, they develop status epilepticus. They don't respond to medication and mortality is very high. Similarly, as I already said, CNS infections like encephalitis is associated with high mortality, and it also progresses to refractory status epilepticus. In contrast, cerebral tumors and traumatic brain injury, they do respond well and may not progress into refractory status as always. This is a very interesting recent publication on the etiologies and characteristics of this refractory status in different areas of the world, where they compared the Europe, USA, and India. If you see, we had 72 patients. We were part of this study along with All India Institute of Medical Sciences. And in that, interestingly, if you look at it, when you look at the etiology across the continents, if you see, infections are commonest in Asia when compared to Europe and USA. Whereas if you look at the etiology of the status epilepticus, cryptogenic etiology means where we don't find out the etiology, and acute encephalitis, metabolic etiologies, and anoxia are associated with high mortality. And when they looked at the outcome of status epilepticus, interestingly, in all the three continents, the amount of recovery is almost 70%. Deaths were almost 20%. And even in those countries, people withdrew the medication and went off like llamas. So it was equal across the globe. Whereas if you look at the neurological outcome of intravenous anesthetic drugs, good outcome was seen only in 40% of the cases. That is very important because a person recovering from status epilepticus should be able to go back to his work, career, and also studies or whatever. His quality of life is very important. But if you see, almost 40 to 50% of the cases had a poor Rankin score. And also the death was almost those, that is IV anesthetic drugs means they are all super refractory status epilepticus. So these refractory cases, the mortality is high, almost 30%, when compared to only 10 to 15% mortality in status epilepticus, which responds to immediate medication. So why this happens? Why a patient with status epilepticus will evolve as refractory and super refractory status? This is very important and interesting theory in the management. Normally, there is, during status, there is a reduction in the GABAergic activity, and there is an increase in the glutamatergic activity. But it's not only the GABA is reduced, GABA is normally inhibitory and protects us from status. So here the GABA activity is reduced. Not only that, GABA becomes excitatory instead of inhibitory. mechanisms during the evolution of the status. So this GABA loss along with increase in the glutamatergic activity leads to mitochondrial failure and also opening of the blood-brain barrier, and the inflammatory markers enter the brain, and this becomes a vicious circle. So this just shows that there is receptor trafficking which intensifies during status epilepticus with reduction in the GABA, increase in the NMDA, which leads to intracellular calcium. This red one is the NMDA, which increases markedly. And these become both NMDA and GABA become proconvulsants during the process of status epilepticus. So how do we manage this? The management is very important. Hit early and hit hard means the moment the patient gets a seizure, we should not allow that to progress into status. It should be addressed immediately. So this is where the pre-hospital treatment is important. So it can be given by the patients, caregivers, or even the ambulance or paramedical persons, where either a rectal diazepam, buccal midazolam can be given. Nowadays, we have nasal midazolam spray, which is very effective in preventing the status epilepticus. And the treatment principles include always termination at the earliest, and while terminating, establish the etiology and prevent the recurrence, and also treat if any systemic complications. The first line drugs are always either lorazepam, diazepam, or midazolam, but most of us are using IV midazolam now. And alternatives in children can be rectal diazepam or IV phenobarbital or intranasal midazolam. That is the first line drug. The second line drug, we have always give the first line drug immediately because first line drug's half-life is very short, around only 30 to 45 minutes. So by the time we should start preparing for the loading doses. So the second line agent can be fosphenytoin or phenytoin, the dose of which is 20 milligrams per kg. Nowadays, we are using more and more of levetiracetam because of ease of access, and ready-made preparations, ready-to-use preparations are available. Again, levetiracetam can be given in a maximum dose of 40 to even 80 milligrams per kg sometimes, but usually we first go with 40 mg per kg. And then nowadays, after giving this, if there is a failure, we can always use another second line AED like lacosamide infusion. Then the third line AED, once a first line and second line is used, if there is no control, we should go for third line AED. The third line AEDs are usually intravenous anesthetic drugs like midazolam, propofol, thiopental, and others is ketamine. So normally, which AED should we use? I will come to the details of each. So which AED to be used is a controversy. Normally, there is not much evidence to decide which should be the first line AED, which should be the second line AED. What is the evidence available is lorazepam, diazepam are equally effective. You can use either phenytoin or phenobarbital also. But nowadays, phenobarbital, we should never give benzodiazepines followed by phenobarbital because both will cause respiratory depression. So, and it's not available also. Phenobarbital IV preparations are no longer available. So always better use either phenytoin or fosphenytoin or even levetiracetam. Valproate also is as effective as this, but we use in patients who have a lot of comorbidities. And recently, there is evidence that even lacosamide and levetiracetam are equally effective in the management of status epilepticus. After you have given one first line and one second or even two second line AEDs, should we go on using more AEDs or directly go to IV anesthetic drugs? What is the evidence for it? We have two interesting studies from NIMHANS and AIIMS. In this, by using a second line, means you have given phenytoin or levetiracetam, then you go for either another drug like lacosamide. The advantage of this is, in AIIMS study, they found that it prevents the patient going on to the ventilation. Because in our country, it's very difficult to manage the ventilatory availabilities in the ICUs. But however, the studies from the West found that if one second line AED fails, there is no point in using another second line AED, and directly one should go for IV anesthetic drugs because we need to avoid the status fast. So if that is the case, again, we have so many anesthetic drugs which can be used in the ICU for the control of status epilepticus. Which one should we use? Again, how do we compare these drugs? First, coming to midazolam, which most of us use because of ease of use. It should be given in a loading dose of 0.2 milligrams per kg, followed by a continuous infusion, where you can go up to 2 milligrams per kg per hour. And the induction is rapid and effective, and it can be used as first drug. But the problem with this is, hypotension which occurs when we are using the midazolam in higher doses. So you need to give again inotropic drugs, and it sometimes it can cause metabolic acidosis. And other thing is tolerance on midazolam. We have patients who are on 20 milligrams per hour. Still they become conscious when the seizures are not there. That is because of tolerance. And sometimes the drug may not be effective because of tachyphylaxis. The second drug is thiopentone. Midazolam is useful both in convulsive and non-convulsive status, whereas thiopentone we use only in convulsive status. It should not be used in non-convulsive status. Thiopentone, again given as a bolus of 100 milligrams stat, followed by 5 milligrams per kg per hour. But the major issues with thiopentone is it is immunosuppressive drugs, causes bone marrow suppression, and hypotension again needs inotropic. Most important is arrhythmias. So one should carefully monitor the heart, and a baseline echo and arrhythmia should be monitored carefully. The third drug is propofol, which is usually used in some protocols, where again the loading dose is 3 to 5 milligrams per kg with an infusion of 1 to 15 mg per kg. Again, it also can cause hypotension, and in children one should avoid because it can cause severe metabolic acidosis and hypotension. And most important is it increases the one is cardiac arrhythmias. Most important with propofol is the propofol infusion syndrome, where the patient will have profound hypotension, hyperlipidemia, and metabolic acidosis because of its effect on the carmycin-palmyl transferase pathway. So one has to remember this and monitor closely the lipid functions also. And when we are giving, so finally we can give any one of these drugs. But we use a lot of midazolam, and if there is no response, if it is convulsive, we go for thiopentol. So what are the complications? Whatever be the anesthetic drugs we are using, definitely then we need an elective intubation and mechanical ventilation. All these drugs will cause marked hypotension, increase the infection rate because of bone marrow suppression. They cause severe ileus, causing intestinal obstruction, renal failure, and we can have life-threatening propofol infusion syndrome with propofol. So based on this, actually there is a good review in the American Academy of Neurology journal, Neurology, where the class 3 evidence shows that higher proportion of infection and increased risk of death when we are giving IV anesthetic drugs, but we have no option. So, and hence ketamine has come into practice. This is also IV anesthetic drug, but there are some important advantages of ketamine. So ketamine in the refractory status epilepticus shown to be effective. How? All the other IV anesthetic drugs are GABA agonists, whereas ketamine is NMDA antagonist. So by combining midazolam with ketamine, we are using drugs with different mechanisms of action. And ketamine is a neuroprotective agent and causes electrographic control of the seizures, and it is not associated with cardiovascular depression. And ketamine will cause increase in the BP, and hence midazolam will cause decrease in the BP. So when you combine midazolam with ketamine, the BP is maintained and there is no need for inotropic drugs. And it appears to safe to combine ketamine with GABAergic compounds like midazolam because of a synergistic effect. But however, ketamine is used as a third line agent. Means if IV anesthetic drugs, midazolam and all fail, we add this to midazolam. It should never be given independently alone. It should be combined with midazolam, and always use with midazolam for best response, and don't avoid using for more than 2 weeks to avoid long-term consequences. But again, remember the side effects of ketamine. It can cause increase in the ocular pressure, intracranial pressure. It can cause hallucinations when they are recovering. Long-term use of more than 2 weeks can cause cerebral atrophy and memory issues. So one can avoid this by not using for more than 2 weeks. Then, so what is the meta-analysis says about these various drugs? If you see, the best drug is midazolam, which has a mortality of less mortality compared to the other drugs. But again, the side effects are more with other drugs and less with midazolam. So always better to use midazolam. And regarding the efficacy also, if you see death during the use of these drugs, with thiopentol 19%, but only 2% with midazolam when compared to even propofol. So all these studies suggest that midazolam is better and safe drugs. So the recommendation says that midazolam should be the first line therapy in most of the cases with IV anesthetic drugs. And if it is convulsive, then thiopental should be the first line drugs. And then sometimes inhalation drugs are available like isoflurane and desflurane, but they are rarely used because they need special machinery to administer this. So finally, the level of evidence is high for the use of lorazepam as first line and midazolam as the third line agent. And if still the patient is not responding, we always use immunotherapies like methylprednisolone 1 gram per day for 5 days. If no response, go for immunoglobulins, followed by immunoglobulins or plasma exchange. And in some cases, we used even rituximab. Possibly all these are cases of autoimmune encephalitis which give response. Non-pharmacological management, like we had one patient who underwent a vagal nerve stimulation because status was not responding. So if nothing works, then possibly neurostimulation is an option. And most importantly, during this time, we should remember the complications which can be status related like hypothermia, hypotension, hypoglycemia, metabolic acidosis, rhabdomyolysis because of continuous jerking, pulmonary edema, cerebral edema. Whereas anesthetic drug related include increased infection, intestinal obstruction, ileus, and life-threatening propofol infusion syndrome. So once the controversies, what are the guidelines for the management? We have so many guidelines available, but this is the simple algorithm. First, you give the first intravenous benzodiazepine, which can be any of that, followed by anti-epileptic drug. If no response, go for IV anesthetic drugs. Some people give further anti-epileptic drugs instead of IV anesthetic. That is also okay. And if there is no response, immediately go either to midazolam or thiopental. And then meanwhile, we can try the others, immunomodulation and also other approaches. This is a simple approach based on the duration of status epilepticus. Then what is the role of continuous EEG monitoring? EEG monitoring really helps if one can really do it. It is useful for two indications. One is to titrate what is the dose, where we get a burst suppression pattern. Till then, we can adjust the medication. Uncertain if isolated, electrographic seizures result in significant additional neuronal injury. But there is no need if you are not able to achieve burst suppression to go on increasing the midazolam. So, but in 80% of the cases, we achieve a burst suppression. How long should we continue the medication? Till the patient is seizure-free for at least 24 hours on the IV anesthetic drugs. After that, start tapering. If he gets the seizure, again up titrate. If no seizures, reduce gradually over a period of next 24 hours. So we can slowly wean off the patient from the IV anesthetic drugs. If seizures recur, the process is repeated at longer intervals. Then, but most important is the anesthetic drugs really working? What are we putting down? Is it the patient or is it the epilepsy? This debate is mainly to highlight that the side effects of IV anesthetic drugs should not be at the cost of the survival of the patient. So we have to be extremely careful. And if it is non-convulsive status, it should not cause much harm. Hence, there is no need to increase the IV anesthetics in a higher way. Then, if you look at the mortality, it is already said SE is associated 20%, RSC is 30%, SRSC is almost 50%. And if there is superrefractory status, 1/3 of them become disabled. So it's very important we prevent the progression of SC to RSC and SRSC. Then what determines the outcome? So till now, the evidence says etiology is the one which determines the outcome. It's not the duration of status epilepticus or anything, but etiology which determines the outcome of refractory status. So encephalitis will evolve into refractory status and is associated with poor prognosis. And 80% of the deaths are related to underlying etiology, like hypoxia or even hypoxic brain damage or even the encephalitis. So this is also from our study that encephalitis is associated with high mortality and progression to refractory status epilepticus. And even if you look at the cryptogenic etiology, like we have seen in this child where MRI is normal, that it progresses into refractory status, but it is not associated with high mortality. Then is the longer duration is associated with bad outcome? Few studies suggest that if it progresses to SRSC, the mortality is 40 to 60%. So the mortality is less in case of RSC and SC, but very high in refractory status epilepticus. And if you look at this, the same thing is shown. The more number of IV anesthetic drugs used is if somebody uses 4 to 5 IV anesthetic drugs, the mortality is very high. And also they are more disabled at the end of the outcome. And they may not be able to go back to their careers or even the schools. Then the EEG pattern, there can be various patterns like rhythmic delta, generalized triphasic. Don't bother about the pattern. More important is only achieving burst suppression. So we have to target only for burst suppression. We need not bother what is the pattern of the EEG. So flat or burst suppression can be achieved in 80%, which is associated with a better outcome. This is just to show a burst suppression pattern where the prolonged burst suppression can be achieved in a patient with status epilepticus. Then what should be the duration of coma? It is at least 24 hours after the seizures have stopped. After that, we start reducing the dose over 24 to 48 hours, sometimes even in 72 hours. So how aggressively should we treat? We should balance. There are arguments for aggressive treatment and also against the aggressive treatment, which I already summarized before. So this is just summarizes the same. So we have to be balanced between the side effects and complications of status and maintain the patient well, achieving possibly burst suppression. If not, at least outside seizures should not be there, and down titrate once the seizures have stopped, meanwhile treating the etiology. So I'll just conclude by a last case when a patient did not follow the guidelines. This is a 25-year-old boy who developed first time epilepsy without any fever. And if you see, he came to the OPD, and during the OPD, he never had any seizure. He developed only focal seizures. So we thought we gave him anti-epileptic drugs. Then he evolved and he went into the ICU with continuous seizures. Then his MRI brain was normal. Then this is the MRI brain. Then we started midazolam infusion in a low dose to avoid going onto the ventilator, but still it also didn't work. And this is his EEG, which shows continuous spiking, and he developed status epilepticus. This is just to show the EEGs initially similar to the previous case, right side followed by the left side. Then in the hospital, we gave, according to the protocol, he evolved into super refractory also. So you can see that he became now convulsive to non-convulsive, where he will be continuously looking without responding with some orofacial movements, which typically occurs in something called an NMDA receptor encephalitis. These are the orofacial dyskinesias occurring. Then we suspected autoimmune encephalitis, gave him immunoglobulins, but during the treatment, even the PET was done, which showed mesial temporal hyperintensities. But what I want to highlight here is the MRI was normal. We gave rituximab along with the anti-epileptic drugs, but he developed a severe Stevens-Johnson syndrome during the management. He was on 6 drugs. We don't know which drug to take off. We had to stop all the drugs, and it was so severe. But this is the recovery during the Stevens-Johnson syndrome. And then with that, he started seizing because we had to cut down and give him on valparin, gabapentin, clobazam. Even for valparin, he developed a rash. If you see, the least rash occurs with gabapentin. Hence, he was given gabapentin with clobazam and phenobarbital. And finally, over a period, his Stevens-Johnson's recovered. So for status, he has to be for 1 month, and for Stevens-Johnson's, he has to be another 1 month. So we should be aware of these complications of the drugs, which sometimes, though his HLA-B 1502 was negative, he developed the rash. And later we did a follow-up MRI, which showed typical clusteral hyperintensities, which is typical of NMDA receptor encephalitis. So possibly that is the reason he responded to rituximab, and it was diagnosed as antibody negative possible autoimmune encephalitis, and he was treated. So this is when so always it's not possible to follow the guidelines. We have to use our best decision to manage these patients. So in summary, the chances of successful termination of refractory status epilepticus is possible with one first line, two second line drugs. With the third line AED is less. Hence, always better to go on to IV anesthetic drugs. And etiology of status epilepticus is the determinant of mortality, but lack of aggressive treatment contributes substantially to mortality in refractory status epilepticus. Always follow the protocol with some personalized management in few cases, like I showed in the last. And I thank you. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm saying is that in status epilepticus in COVID era, can you summarize in five or 6 points? Because with this, which I'm going to spread it to, so these are basically a lecture for neurologists, but I'm going to take few points, which I will spread it to all physicians and GPs in the country, because they will be the first point of contact when it comes to status epilepticus. Few take-home messages on status epilepticus in COVID era, and few take-home messages which you feel every physician in the country should know. Like you said about the definition, which has changed about from 10 minutes to 5 minutes. So similarly, can we have 4 or 5 points, which yes, I, as the editor, can send it to all people? Then we will take up the questions which have come to us.
Yeah, yes, sir. The first and foremost important is, most of the time, the first seizure is managed by the primary care physician. So the moment a patient gets a GTCS, even if it is single, usually they come with a cluster. So if the seizure lasts for more than 5 minutes, or if there are 2 seizures in that 5 minutes, one should give an IV anti-epileptic drug, initial whatever midazolam or lorazepam, but loading dose should be given at the periphery or the district first. Most of the time, the moment there is a cluster seizure, they will say go to the higher center. First give the 20 mg per kg of phenytoin. It should be the full dose. There is nothing like giving a lesser dose. If you give lesser dose, that leads to more prolongation of the seizures and evolution into refractory status. So give the correct dose of anti-epileptic drug, one first line and one second line. If still seizing, possibly you can give another drug, then arrange for the transportation along with oxygen and an IV thing to the secondary or the tertiary care center. And most of the time, once they don't respond and become refractory, you should always keep them in the ICU. And if somebody gets a cluster seizures, you never know who will progress. So always close monitoring is important. That is one point. The second point I would like to say is, sometimes following the 1 or 2 GTCS, the patients will have continuous staring or confused. So that is a non-convulsive status, following a convulsive status. So in that case, it's very important, one should do an EEG to identify it, and again treat it in the same way like you treat a convulsive status. Like I showed 2 examples. So that's why we always say hit early and hit hard. And monitor, we should be aware of all the side effects of drugs and manage in the ICU. This is a teamwork where the ICU specialist along with the physician can give the best service. So first is treatment, followed by evaluation for the etiology.
So when it comes to at a primary level, so that we need to know the new definition, and we need to give a full dose and then transfer. That's fine. Second
yes,
is,
they should keep a midazolam nasal spray also in the primary. The moment somebody comes, first give a nasal spray, because it takes time for an IV line to be kept. After that, we keep an IV line. So instead of lorazepam or midazolam IV, we can give directly nasal spray, then go to IV and means anti-epileptic drug like phenytoin.
Can seizure be the primary manifestations of COVID-19?
Till now, if you look at the review of neurological manifestations of COVID, only 5 to 8% of the people had seizures during the entire course. This is from the Chinese study. But there is now good evidence coming the involvement of COVID and neurology, like it affects the other organs. Recently, sir, but there is no evidence about status epilepticus. But recently we had a case where it is a status epilepticus. We suspected autoimmune encephalitis. But during evaluation, the patient had COVID pneumonia and PCR was positive. For almost 3 samples were positive. And the patient was treated in the same lines, needed IV anesthetic drugs, following tracheostomy, now gradually recovering. So possibly the COVID virus can cause something like encephalitis, which can trigger the status epilepticus.
So
actually, COVID encephalitis has been described, where you get 1 or 2 seizures, but status epilepticus is very unusual.
So, madam, how early should we start immunomodulation if status epilepticus is due to NDMA encephalitis? This is Dr. Arvind. He is not written from where. Dr. Arvind N. Arvind.
Actually, once we have given the first and second line AEDs and you started the anesthetic drugs in 24 hours, if there is no response, we start off IV methylprednisolone. And it goes 1 gram per day for the next 5 days. If the patient is a diabetic, we avoid IV methylprednisolone. If any contraindications, go for IVIG for next 5 days. Both these drugs have not only immunomodulatory, sometimes they work as even anti-inflammatory. So if there is no contraindication, better to start within 24 hours of midazolam if there is no response.
So before I go to the second question, for the people who are watching this program, you can, this is being sponsored and certified by the Indian Academy of Neurology. B, in the bottom, you can click and there are MCQs and you need to re-enter your email, check those MCQs to get certification from Indian Academy of Neurology. Make sure that there is a bottom, you click that, you enter into MCQs. There are 10 questions which you need to answer what you have studied. And you need to re-enter your email and then we will get the response and accordingly we will issue you a certificate for that. Dr. Arvind again has asked, Madam, any modification the treatment of if it is NORS or FIRES?
Protocols are the same, but FIRES usually occurs in children, where in children ketogenic diet is also useful. Immunomodulation therapy, including rituximab, has been tried even in FIRES. So even in NORS is a new onset refractory status epilepticus, where there is no past history of epilepsy. In most of these cases in adults is autoimmune. So immunomodulatory therapy is useful.
Dr. Bhaskar has asked, how rational would you approach to administer the same existing anti-epileptic drug in IV mode, higher doses rather than changing it in RSE, refractory status epilepticus?
Yeah, if the patient is a known epileptic drug and drug withdrawal is the cause for epilepsy, it's always better to give the same drug. But for example, if the patient is in a drug for which IV parenteral preparation is not available, like oxcarbazepine or carbamazepine, then we go for IV levetiracetam or even phenytoin. Otherwise, always better to use the same drug if it is a drug withdrawal status epilepticus.
Swapna Sarit, how common is seizure in COVID patients? You have already said. What is the most common cause of seizures in COVID patients? I think this has already been answered. And Vipulji is asking management of super refractory status epilepticus. That also has been covered in the lecture. And next thing which has come is, what is the role of pregabalin in status epilepticus?
Pregabalin has no role in status epilepticus. There is very limited data on the role of pregabalin. There is evidence for the use of topiramate in status epilepticus, where it can be given in higher doses of almost 400 milligrams stat, followed by 200 milligrams twice a day in a 50 kg person. But there is no role for pregabalin. Possibly we can use when there is, instead of gabapentin, like we had in this patient who had a rash. Otherwise, no role for a regular management of status epilepticus.
So another question which has come from Jabalpur is the role of zinc in status epilepticus, because they say that in the COVID era, so much zinc is being given now Does it has any effect on neurology, status epilepticus, or in a routine epilepsy?
Sir, I didn't get the question, sir. I didn't understand.
Any role of zinc? Is zinc connected with epilepsy?
Any role of zinc?
If is zinc connected with epilepsy?
Unlikely, sir. Possibly in epilepsy status in pregnancy, people were using, but not in the other cases. There are some studies where zinc has been tried as intravenous parenteral preparations with some success, but it is not into the guidelines or evidence-based to use it in regularly.
Is there any connection between vitamin D deficiency and status epilepticus?
No.
There's no connection with that. So these were some of the questions which have come to us from the viewers who have been watching this program. And I like you to sum up now take-home messages again so that we can close this. Again, this session was sponsored by, certified by Indian Academy of Neurology. You can enter into MCQs. There are 10 MCQs you can answer. Enter your email address and you will be able to get a certificate from the IAN. Okay, can we have a take-home messages now? Yeah, you already have given for a GP, but now for a neurologist, take-home messages.
Yeah, the take-home message in the management of status epilepticus is we should be aware of the definitions that the 5 minutes limit is to have an aggressive management. So management of status epilepticus involves 3 important points. One is starting the treatment early according to the protocols, first line followed by second line. If no response, the third line. The second point is investigating the etiology simultaneously, usually looking for a metabolic causes followed by an MRI brain. If it is normal, nowadays PET is a very important role to identify autoimmune encephalitis. The third important in the management is always keep a close watch on the complications. We will not identify it unless we have a close watch with continuous monitoring for arrhythmias. And then intestinal obstruction should be identified early by watching for the bowel sounds on a day-to-day basis once the patient in a regular thing. In addition to this, if there is a facility for continuous EEG monitoring, it is a great tool to help the neurologist to achieve the target dose of IV anesthetic drugs by titrating it to achieve burst suppression pattern on the EEG. Again, later it is useful to down titrate once the patient is seizure free, because we don't know whether it is unconscious because of continuous seizures or because of IV anesthetic drugs. So this will help us and we can adjust the medication in that way. So always it is good early management, identify the etiology, close watch for complications. These 3 are key in the management of status epilepticus.
So I want to ask the last question, and that's because government is anticipating and planning to bring non-MBBS doctors and non-MBBS people in 150,000 what they are wellness centers in the country. That means that at a primary level, you will not even have an MBBS. You may have a ASHA worker or an ANM. And 5 minutes is the smallest, because up till now we had a 10 minutes window for a traffic accident. And we know there is a golden hour for so many conditions. We have MI, stroke, everywhere we talk about the window of 1 hour. But what about if a person has a status epilepticus or has the first onset seizure? Forget about status, because once you treat a seizure, then only you will come to know whether it is going into a status epilepticus or not. What should be your recommendation at a primary level when MBBS doctor is not available? What can be given by
nowadays? Yes, sir. Nowadays, we are training all our parents of the patients who have epilepsy how to give an intranasal midazolam. So it can also be given as a buccal midazolam. So that is best. So to train the ASHA workers or whoever is there, how to use the dose of midazolam in children as well as adults. Usually we give 2 milligrams, adults we can give up to 4 milligrams. It is available as a nasal spray and it is quite safe. Second thing is nowadays we have mouth dissolving clobazam preparations. which can be, first we can give a spray, followed by put one 10 milligram tablet in an adult and a 5 milligram in a child, and put it just on the tongue or under the tongue. Even if he's seizing, once you put it, at least some effect of the drug will come, during which we can arrange for the transportation of the child to the closest physician available.
So there is a recommendation by Madam that everybody, so therefore it becomes a duty of people like us to spread this message all across the country, that at home by the parents or by anybody. It's like something like in the US, you have for the drug abuse, where you have a self-injection and you give them treatment for de-addiction at home. Similarly, if you suspect a seizure, and if the seizure is lasting more than 5 minutes, or in between there are 2 seizures and there is no regaining consciousness, so there will be a first aid involvement which you are justifying. Even if you are a non-doctor, it is justified to save lives, both under Indian Penal Code and also by the Neurology Association, that you should be able to save the life.
Yeah, it is a question because they can't give the IV drugs.
Yes,
at least give the intranasal preparations.
Yes, intranasal preparation can be given. That's available. A protocol, we will have it verified by Madam Sita Jayalakshmi, and we will also get the Indian Academy of Neurology to certify that, and I'll make sure that it reaches all the primary doctors in the country. So thank you very much, Professor Sita Jayalakshmi ji. It was a wonderful talk. And you have 3 goddesses in you, Sita, Jaya, and Lakshmi. So you have a combination of all the 3 goddesses, and that's what was represented in your talk. So it was all talked about the Shakti as the main lady, and the main lady who made her subject very clear. So thank you very much, and thank you all our viewers. And the proceedings of this video will be uploaded on our MedTalks platform, and that will also be available for others to watch. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.